Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Prime Minister has been accused of misleading MPs after the publication of the government's legal advice on her Brexit deal. In a heated Commons exchange, Theresa May denied allegations that she concealed the facts about the proposed Northern Ireland backstop, a controversial arrangement that would keep the UK in a customs union with the EU if a trade deal isn't agreed by December 2020. The Attorney-General, in his 6-page legal opinion, advised that despite assurances by both the UK and the European Union that both would aim for the backstop to be temporary, legally it could endure indefinitely. The advice also warns that the UK could be stuck in protracted and repeating rounds of negotiations with Brussels. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg has been following today's developments.
Grimly carrying on. After 3 defeats in Parliament yesterday, now a legal mess on the most contentious part of the Brexit compromise, that so-called backstop.
Have you lost control of Brexit, Prime Minister?
After Number 10 was forced to publish its private lawyer's advice on how Northern Ireland would be more tangled up with the EU than the rest of the country.
Questions to the Prime Minister?
We have seen the facts that the government tried to hide. Mr. Speaker, this government is giving Northern Ireland permanent membership of the single market and the customs union. The Prime Minister has been misleading the House, inadvertently or otherwise.
A serious charge to lay round here. The Prime Minister says there's nothing new.
There is indeed no unilateral right to pull out of the backstop. What I have also said is it is not the intention of either party that the backstop should A, be used in the first place, or should B, if it is used, should be anything other than temporary.
But there was more. Those Northern Irish MPs who are meant to be the Prime Minister's friends, sounding more and more like her enemies.
Does the Prime Minister agree at this last moment that the entire premise of the backstop has been based on a false assertion?
Yet the legal advice spells out in more gory detail what the government had tried to gloss. The Attorney-General writes that the so-called backstop will apply differently in Great Britain to Northern Ireland, 2 parts of the UK with separate rules, and that the European Court will continue to have jurisdiction over Northern Ireland. The legal advice also states this relationship would endure indefinitely until another agreement takes its place. That could take a long time. The advice does make clear, though, neither side wants it to happen. It is not a comfortable resting place for the EU either.
Well, the Prime Minister is trying to persuade people to vote for her deal. What this document shows is the weaknesses of her deal, and she didn't want to tell people what they were.
And remember, unhappiness over the backstop is what makes the overall backdrop for the government so gloomy. Dozens of Tories loudly swearing they will reject the Brexit compromise because of it.
Well, it shows the very predatory nature of the EU's claim to Northern Ireland, and it's very extraordinary that really there will be a different relationship between Northern Ireland and the EU.
But is it remotely realistic to imagine you can get rid of the backstop now?
Of course it's possible to get rid of it, and it's not essential for the negotiations.
Is there any way you can see yourself voting for this as it stands?
No. There's no point in having a mishmash of Remain and Leave when the result is so bad.
If it's that bad, is there any point leaving?
Let's throw this deal out. And as for whether this deal is better than remaining, I have to admit it's a pretty finely balanced question.
It might feel like it, but this is not a rerun of the referendum. In less than a week, MPs will vote not on in or out, but on the Prime Minister's compromise. And there is a minority ready to grin and bear it.
I think people should think very carefully before voting it down, because then we would be in absolutely unprecedented territory. And I think that MPs have got to rise to this occasion, step up to the plate and sort this out, show that we can do that, without having to spend too many more months arguing about it.
This could move fast, but right now there's no sign of enough support for the Prime Minister's plan. That's why in private, conversations are starting to swirl about the kind of extra promises Theresa May might have to make to get this done. But so far, there's nothing firm on the horizon that would really change the equation. After more than 2 years of argument, there is now an agreement. In less than a week, MPs will give their verdict on it. But don't hold your breath for a sudden outbreak of goodwill. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as the debate about Brexit continues tonight at Westminster, the options for what could happen at the end of it are many. Is there any chance the Prime Minister's deal will get through? Could there be a second referendum? Could we leave the EU with no deal at all? Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar explains what could happen next.
Despite all the setbacks and all the defeats, Theresa May is battling on, standing by her plan for Brexit, maybe against all the odds. But what happens next? Well, let's say Mrs May wins. That may look unlikely just now, but if Parliament approves her plan, Britain leaves on schedule on March the 29th. An unexpected triumph for Mrs May. At this stage, it seems more probable that she loses. Her Conservative critics may then try again to force a vote of confidence in her. And either way, Labour will look at tabling a vote of confidence in the government. That would be hard to win. Tories and the DUP would have to vote for it. Meanwhile, unless Mrs May manages to somehow get a better deal in Brussels, the UK would be on course to leave the EU with no deal at all. But the idea of what Brexit is, sometimes called a clean Brexit, is just not that simple anymore. MPs voted yesterday to give themselves power to decide the country's next steps if Mrs May is defeated, and there's no majority in Parliament for a no-deal Brexit. So what then? There is support within both main parties for negotiating a new deal, outside the EU, but close to it, a Norway-style Brexit, though Brexiteers call that Brexit in name only, Brino, taking EU rules without shaping them, continuing free movement of people in and out of Britain. In the end, could Parliament simply fail to approve any solution and turn back to the people? Well, a general election is one way, and it's Labour's first choice. It's hard to imagine, but even that can't be entirely ruled out. Otherwise, the idea that seemed all but impossible until recently may be gaining ground among MPs as a potential way to break the deadlock. Campaigners call it a people's vote. To most people, it's the idea of a fresh referendum.
Brino, you heard it here first. John Pienaar there.
The government was forced to hand over its Brexit legal advice to Parliament this morning. The 6-page document written by the Attorney-General only examines the Northern Irish backstop. He confirms it would endure indefinitely if Britain and the EU can't agree on a future trading relationship. Theresa May insisted again that both sides intended it to be temporary, but that has not satisfied the Democratic Unionist Party or many in her own party. In the Commons, MPs have continued their debate on the Prime Minister's deal, with critic after critic on all sides standing up to say why they don't want to back it. Our political editor Gary Gibbon has been watching events unfold.
We can't just ride into the valley of death, one Tory MP said, as plans and strategies swirl around Parliament to avoid a charge of the Light Brigade disaster next Tuesday.
The government might box itself in with its own red lines. There is no reason why this Parliament has to accept to be boxed in by those same red lines.
But it's in everybody's interest, theirs and ours, to set a date by which the backstop at least falls away.
This deal is flawed and also makes us weaker. But we need to take the time to build the consensus on the way forward.
We come out of everything except the customs union and the single market.
And Oliver Letwin's Plan B imagines Labour and Tory MPs working together to sideline hardline Brexiteers.
Would it look like a government of national unity, albeit a temporary one?
I think it would look like politicians working on a cross-party basis in the interest of the country to prevent a no-deal Brexit.
There were debates in the Lords as well as the second full day of debate in the Commons. And the Scottish Parliament rejected the deal and no deal by 92 to 95.
There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed.
Theresa May is still charging into battle with her Plan A on Tuesday and trying to win round her critics to her deal, and especially the backstop.
I'm continuing to listen to colleagues on that and considering the way forward.
The Prime Minister's been talking to some Brexiteers who don't like the deal, promising a Commons vote before the backstop takes effect. With the publication of the Attorney-General's letter on the legal effects of the backstop, isn't helping those efforts. It warns that the UK could become bogged down in protracted and repeated rounds of negotiations if it wanted to get out of the backstop. It says the backstop would endure indefinitely until it was replaced by a new trade agreement, and there could be stalemate with the UK unable to exit lawfully.
We have seen the detail of the legal advice. We have seen the facts that the government tried to hide. Mr. Speaker, this government is giving Northern Ireland permanent membership of the single market and the customs union. The Prime Minister has been misleading the House, inadvertently or otherwise. The Prime Minister must explain.
It is not the intention of either party that the backstop should A, be used in the first place, or should B, if it is used, should be anything other than temporary.
The DUP said that strengthened their intention to vote against the deal, but it didn't mean they automatically wouldn't prop up the Conservative government.
And after Tuesday, then let us see where we go from there. Our deal with in the confidence supplies with the Conservative Party, not with Theresa May.
So you think that the confidence supply arrangement might continue on the grounds that she might not be there, she might have to fold on her agreement, any number of possibilities?
Well, any number of possibilities exist. We've seen in the last 24 hours. In 24 hours, everything could change again. Let's see what happens. Let's not make too many predictions going forward.
Amidst all this tension, voices beginning to talk openly about cross-party cooperation and a government of national unity.
Do you think this sort of arrangement would sustain, should sustain?
Well, it only needs to be sustained for long enough to carry this through the House of Commons and carry through the withdrawal bill to get to the point where we have actually left the EU and entered a new arrangement. Just a few months.
And then people return to their presumably shattered parties.
Well, look, politics is going to be changed by all of this. It has already been changed by all of this.
Tonight, across the road, the Chief Whip is in the Lion's Den with ERG pro-Brexit opponents of the deal. Rare ventures into enemy territory in strange times. Well, that meeting with the Chief Whip, I understand, has allowed the Chief Whip to be treated to Jacob Rees-Mogg, telling the pro-Brexit Tory rebels in the room that the DUP will end their confidence and supply arrangement with the government if the deal goes through. What a lovely evening treat for him. The legal opinion publication came out. That's also firming up opinion on that side of the argument. It was in starker language than the cleansed version the government had put out a few days earlier. Those talks with the Brexiteers that I mentioned that are trying to peel some of them off, Number 10 talking to some Brexiteers, those actually do reveal some divisions within the ERG ranks. One ERG source talked about the people who are going along to Number 10, talking to them about a possible amendment that might save the day for the government, describing them as gullible, thick egotists. So divisions in those ranks, divisions everywhere you speak, people talking about some sort of unity and consensus, but my goodness, it feels a long way away.
Gary Gibbon at the Mother of Parliaments. Now, a short time ago, I sat down with the Shadow Chancellor down in Westminster, John McDonnell, and I began by asking him if he would serve in a government of national unity, as was suggested by a Conservative MP yesterday.
We wouldn't be united. We couldn't agree on 99% of policy, to be honest. I think even the ones that we would agree upon would be fairly minor.
But you wouldn't be unique in that. Nobody can agree with anybody in their own party, let alone...
Well, I think the Labour Party's held together pretty well throughout this process on Brexit, actually. On virtually our economic agenda and other issues, we're absolutely united.
But there's a degree of fantasy in Labour's approach too. I mean, the idea that Europe is actually open for more negotiation, it's not.
Well, I think if I was any European watching what was happening this last week, you'd realise, actually, to protect their own economy, global economy in terms of its operation of the European market, we're going to have to negotiate again. To protect in their own interest, they're going to have to. They've witnessed that the Prime Minister it doesn't look like she's going to deliver on the deal that she's done with them. Therefore, another deal has to be negotiated.
Yeah, but look at your sort of fundamentals. For example, you do want a single market.
No, we want a relationship with the single market, of course we do. The key thing for us is a permanent customs union, not this customs arrangement that's proposed.
But you can't pick and choose on the single market. The single market comes with freedom of movement.
It does.
And you won't accept freedom
It does, but we think we can negotiate around that. And the reason, well,
Who has ever managed to do it?
Well, I think
even Norway didn't manage to do it.
Well, I think we can, because the times are changing, and with Europe itself is now, there's a debate around, for example, issues of freedom of movement already within European countries. So I think there is a bit of flexibility, but they know now that Theresa May can't deliver on this deal, so therefore, well, let's see if someone else can. And we've always said we're willing to take over the reins.
You're not going to tempt them if you go in there saying, we want something that is impossible for you to deliver. Would you make it possible and deliver it?
Look, I've negotiated in Europe. What you do is you negotiate, and I've always said this, on the basis of mutual interest and mutual respect. And those negotiations in that climate haven't taken place under this government. We think we could.
You want a general election. You want to be in power. You want to renegotiate. The clock is not going to stop. There isn't time for all this. And it's very unlikely there will be a general election.
I think there's a potential for us to negotiate an effective deal which will protect jobs in the economy. But what Labour Party conference has said, quite rightfully, if we can't get the deal that protects jobs in the economy, we will vote against it. And I think the vote against Theresa May's deal, some on the Tory backbenches, the numbers that have been said, I think are exaggerated, but I still think there's a majority in the House against it, so it's a dead duck. So therefore some deal has to be renegotiated, and I don't think Theresa May is capable of doing that, as she's proved over the last 18 months. And it's not just her as an individual, it's the Conservative government.
You think you can squeeze in a general election, you can do all the consultation and all the rest of it, and be fixed in time for the 29th of March?
The easiest route is if the government just moved to one side and let us get on with it. That's the easiest route. If they're not willing to do that, let's have that general election.
No, but let's be candid, and Keir Starmer, I think, has hinted that they accept this, that you could move Article 50, you could move the date and start all over again.
That's not, that's always available, that's always possible, but that's not on the agenda at the moment. What we're trying to do is say, let's get clarity, this deal is not sustainable, and I think the government knows that now.
In the most literal sense of the term, are you a unionist now?
I've always believed in a united Ireland, and I've said that on a regular basis.
No, but the use of the word unionist here is one that keeps the United Kingdom as a union.
Well, we're working on the basis of the existing constitutional settlement and respecting the Good Friday Agreement. In the Good Friday Agreement, it said the union will persist for as long as the people want it, and it'll be the people of Ireland that will determine their future. Brexit shouldn't be an issue to be used either way in that matter. We're preserving the Northern Ireland Good Friday Agreement. Fully agree with it.
John MacDonald, you are a senior, experienced politician. Tell me something that I've not been able to get anyone else to answer. Where will we be in 2 weeks' time?
I haven't got a crystal ball, but let me say this. I think Theresa May's deal will be voted down. I don't think it'll be voted down.
Will she still be Prime Minister?
Not necessarily, but if I go through the options with you, I don't think her deal will go through. I don't think it'll be an enormous vote against, as some newspapers are exaggerating. I think it'll whittle down because of tribal loyalty within the Conservative Party, as in all political parties. It'll vote down. Now, she's got a choice then. Does she go off and negotiate again? Possibly, and then come back with another deal.
Would you have confidence in her coming?
No, I don't think the European Union
So there'll be
would.
a no confidence vote?
Well, possibly. We'll determine that at the time. And the no confidence vote would only go through if it had the support of all opposition parties and some Conservatives as well. We'll have to see.
Well, you must have a sense of that.
Well, there's a feel at the moment that the Prime Minister is not capable of negotiating, but I say it's not down to her individually, because the whole of the government has not been able to negotiate this deal. They've not been able to sustain a stable cabinet, for example, not been able to sustain even a position of the Brexit Secretary for any period of time. So I don't think they're capable of doing it.
Well, as the gruelling political duel continues in Westminster, what do our European colleagues make of it? I'm joined now by our Europe editor, Matt Fry, who hopefully can shed some light. You spent a lot of time knocking about European capitals. What are people saying? Well, that's how I see it, anyway.
OK, so the people I've spoken to today in Berlin and Brussels say the following things. First of all, they are rather tired of the box set that is Brexit. They've watched season 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. They're not interested in watching season 6. They want clarity. They want closure. Now, this means that if Theresa May loses her vote next week and she thinks she can go back to Brussels and get more concessions, forget about it. Your stocking will be empty for Christmas on that front. So the second thing is, what happens if Parliament amends the legislation fundamentally. What happens if there's a second referendum or another general election? Well, they are as clueless about the future as John McDonnell, who we just heard. But what they do want is some sort of sense of destination. They are not prepared, or they're very unwilling, put it this way, to give us a delay if they're not clear about the destination. And what they really don't want is this idea that we will take part in the European elections next May, which are crucial because it's all about the rise of right-wing populism in Europe. We take part in those elections because we've delayed the process, and then we leave with whatever president we've left behind in the form of a revived UKIP or whatever in the European Parliament. They don't want that. They really want closure, but if for some reason we decide to stay, they're happy with that too.
Matt, thanks very much. I'm sure John McDonnell would challenge the idea that he's clueless about the future. Well, earlier I spoke to the Business Minister, Claire Perry, and I began by asking her if the full legal advice had let the cat out of the bag, given that the backstop appears to threaten the integrity of the UK.
Well, I don't think that's certainly not that's not the legal advice I saw, and I think that's quite a harsh interpretation. What it said was that there were, as with any deal, theoretical risks that could come into play if the backstop was ever triggered, which of course it is our desire and belief it will not be, and that ultimately there was a sort of a legal question as to whether this backstop could be triggered unilaterally or not.
Actually, it's much more black and white than that, though, isn't it? Because it treats Northern Ireland differently than the rest of the UK. Let me just quote to you from the document so that everybody's clear. On the customs union, it says the arrangements as a whole apply differently in Great Britain and Northern Ireland. On the single market, it says the implications of Northern Ireland remaining in the EU's single market for goods, while GB, Great Britain, is not, is that for regulatory purposes, GB is essentially treated as a third country by Northern Ireland for goods passing from GB into NI. It treats the Northern Ireland differently from the rest of the UK, it splits it off.
We already have similar, we already have a diversion of some regulatory checks between Northern Ireland and between the UK. And there is a theoretical risk, according to that advice and according to the work done, that some of those checks could be extended. But you have to remember, Cathy, that the original place of the backstop, where the EU started the negotiations, was there would be a complete carve-out of Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. There will be both tariff and regulatory misalignment between those parts of the UK.
You said just a few weeks ago that Theresa May's deal, quote, absolutely does not create any form of separation for Northern Ireland. I've just read you the bits of the document where there is clearly a separation. So were you sold a pup?
No, again, this is, so I would be the first person to say that we would have wanted clearer language, and particularly around the issue of the ECJ and the sort of clarity of separation. But I think we also have to accept that with the clock ticking and with Brexit Day, what is it, 114 days to go or something like that, we have to start making some decisions on this. It's been a negotiation. We have a deal that delivers on the referendum result. We have a deal, by the way, that I believe the majority of my constituents, and I had a Leave voting constituency, support. And the time for the kind of theoretical legalistic arguments which have gone on for decades in the House of Commons has got to come to an end. And the time for us to accept that this is the deal, or we have a high probability of no deal, or indeed, as you can see from some of the conversations that are happening in the House of Commons already, I know you're covering the debate, a strong probability that we will actually, the House of Commons will take control and will ensure there's no Brexit. So that's the deal. There isn't a plan B, and it is my view we have to get behind the PM and support it.
If you're insistent that the deal with Theresa May's deal is not dead, is your deal with the DUP dead?
Well, the DUP have entered into this confidence to supply arrangement. We've worked closely with them on a number of issues.
And they're voting against you on the budget. Well, they voted against you yesterday on contempt of Parliament.
Awful lot of conversations happening, and I was really sorry to see that vote yesterday. I think that was a vote to hang a noose around the neck of future governments, and it was a shame that people were expressing political dissatisfaction with something so important.
Is
so no,
the deal
it's not
with the
dead.
DUP dead? It's not dead.
It's not
right.
dead.
It's on life support. Final yes or no answer. Would you serve in a government of national unity, as some of your colleagues are calling for? Yes or no?
I would serve in a government that delivers on this referendum result and protects the economic growth that we have developed. We have, taken the country from a terrible place economically to a place where jobs are growing, the economy is growing, the industrial strategy, 1 year on, is investing in areas and sectors. I just really want to get on with the deal and serve my constituents and basically serve the national interest, which is what I was sent here to do, as were all other colleagues.
And if serving the national interest means serving in a government of national unity, that's a yes from you, is it?
Let's not even speculate about that government. We're a very, very long way from that. But we are here to serve our constituents, and we should be listening and talking to our constituents about this deal and seeing what they want.
Claire Perry, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy.
Business Minister Claire Perry there, refusing to deny that she would be prepared to serve in a government of national unity. Well, I'm joined now by Helia Ebrahimi, our economics correspondent. And we've had some bad news on the UK economy today, haven't we?
Yeah, I'm afraid the Brexit box set at home isn't much better, because we had the lowest level of factory orders since 2013, save for right after the referendum. And we've really hit a tipping point, because the blame was placed firmly by companies on Brexit uncertainty. No longer fear of what might happen, it's happening to them now. And economists use this data set to gauge future economic growth. And judging by today's message, it's quite worrying. Take, for example, the service sector, the engine of the UK. Well, growth there is basically grinding to a halt. And one analyst even warned that we could go into reverse by the end of this year.
Well, whether it's a box set or a data set, it doesn't bode particularly well for the government selling its deal, does it?
Yeah, just as the Prime Minister was in the House of Commons defending her deal, her number two, Philip Hammond, was just across the road giving evidence to the Treasury Select Committee. And he was asked point blank, how can you defend the Prime Minister's deal when your own department has admitted that any kind of Brexit would make the country poorer? And, Kathy, I mean, Spreadsheet Phil isn't one for being emotional, but he did get a little bit, not Churchillian, but less stiff than he usually is. And his message was that to kind of betray the Brexit voters would cause huge damage to British society, and damage that's a lot more fundamental than just shaving a few points, percentage points of growth off the UK economy. Now, for a lot of working families or companies that are reliant on trade, that kind of calculation may seem strange.
Helia, thanks very much. John.
Well, now, the status of Gibraltar proved to be a sticking point in the lead-up to the Brexit deal agreed on by Theresa May and the EU after Spain appeared to back down from its last-minute threat to veto the agreement. I'm joined now by the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, Fabian Picardo. Chief Minister, what's your reading of what's happened?
Well, I think we're in a situation where there is only really one option at the moment in front of the House of Commons. We have to appreciate that. This is the deal that the House of Commons has to consider, and they have to take a vote on it. And therefore, for Gibraltar...
Well, they're not going to support it, are they?
Well, for Gibraltar, it was important that by the time this got to the House of Commons, we should have carved out for us a safety net to ensure that if there was a transitional period for the United Kingdom, there should also be a transitional period for Gibraltar. And that's what we've done. We've worked very closely together with the current administration, and we've been able to ensure that Gibraltar fits in well with this deal. And this is a deal that works for Gibraltar.
OK, well, you've been telling MPs that today.
I have.
And you've had the advantage of seeing more of them than I have. What did it feel like? I mean, do they seem, oh, wonderful, yes, let's go for this deal?
Well, no, I think there are some who are very supportive of the fact that this deal delivers Brexit, something which I didn't choose and wouldn't choose if there was an opportunity to rescind the Article 50 notification, as there now appears potentially to be. There are others who voted to remain, who think that this is at least a way of delivering on the referendum result. And then, of course, there is a rump of people who think that this does not deliver on the referendum result, or they didn't choose Brexit and they don't want to see it through. But this is the only option today before the House of Commons, and Mrs May has brought a deal back which does put us down gently. And I think that is the one thing that this deal has going for it. It avoids a cliff-edge Brexit.
But moving around the precincts of Westminster, you cannot be unaware that politics in that place is imploding.
Well,
and that
febrile.
has terrible implications, and not least for you.
It is febrile. I've not seen a situation like this in the time that I've been actively following British politics since I was a teenager. And we see history being made every day, which is something quite remarkable on its own. But despite that, Theresa May has been written off almost every day since she took over as Prime Minister in the most difficult circumstances 2.5 odd years ago. People thought she wouldn't bring back a deal. People thought she wouldn't survive. She survived, and she's brought back a deal and managed to carve out a place for Gibraltar in that deal, and that's why I'm backing this deal.
One thing then, what is the bottom line that you do not want damaged?
Well, Gibraltar's economy, of course, is essential. I mean, the sovereignty of Gibraltar is not in play at all, and therefore I don't need to go there. But for Gibraltar to continue to be a vibrant economy, we need to have access to the United Kingdom market. We've been able to assure that in the context of our bilateral discussions with the United Kingdom, and this also gives us access to the EU single market for as long as the UK has that access through the withdrawal process also.
And then that goes?
And then potentially that goes. That's why if you ask any Gibraltarian what their preferred option is, and I'll speak for all of them as their elected representative, we'd rather remain in the European Union.
First Minister, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Back here now, and Brexit sometimes seems, I'm sure you would agree, like a puzzle that basically just doesn't have an answer. Well, this week we have been outlining some of the options. Mrs May could bring back her deal until it gets through over and over again, or she could call another referendum, perhaps with her deal or Remain as the two options. But this evening, the DUP indicated to Robert Peston on his programme that they would bring down her government if she got her deal through the House of Commons. So, if no deal has effectively been ruled out yesterday and her deal today, what on earth does that leave us with? Well, we'll come to perhaps the last potential solution in a moment, but first, Romilly Weeks summarises yet another eventful day in our politics.
Have you lost control of Brexit, Prime Minister?
What can the Prime Minister say to that? Heading into battle again for her near-friendless Brexit deal on a day that her government was humiliated by having to publish the legal advice on the Northern Irish backstop that it tried so hard to keep to itself.
We have seen the facts that the government tried to hide. Mr Speaker, this government is giving Northern Ireland permanent membership of the single market and the customs union. The Prime Minister has been misleading the House, inadvertently or otherwise. The Prime Minister must explain.
That accusation didn't go down well with either the Speaker or the Prime Minister.
It is not the intention of either party that the backstop should A, be used in the first place, or should B, if it is used, should be anything other than temporary.
The most problematic part of the Attorney-General's legal advice is this: confirmation that it could be very hard to get out of the backstop, the insurance policy for avoiding a hard border in Northern Ireland. Despite statements in the protocol that it's not intended to be permanent, he writes, in international law the protocol would endure indefinitely until a superseding agreement took its place. As for the DUP, who are supposed, of course, to support the government, they've upped the ante tonight by saying they're prepared to pull the plug on that arrangement if the Brexit deal goes ahead.
That's the risk that the Prime Minister is running. But even before we get to the point of calling a general election, what I would say to the government and any Conservative MPs who may be thinking of voting for this, how do they think that they're going to get, even if this vote squeaks through, how do they get the withdrawal bill through after that? How do they get all the other legislation that needs to get through the House of Commons? You don't actually have to call a general election without realising how difficult this would put the government's position in.
With the deal in such difficulty, Cabinet Ministers had tried to rally the troops with this warning.
The House of Commons, which has a natural Remain majority, may attempt to steal Brexit from the British people.
If we don't back the Prime Minister, we risk there being no Brexit.
Boris Johnson told me he's not buying it.
Your former close colleague Michael Gove has said it's this deal or no Brexit at all. Are you prepared to take that risk?
I don't think that's true for a minute because, as I say, I think that the will of the 17.4 million, the biggest number of people who have ever voted in this country for a single political proposition, the House of Commons overwhelmingly voted to uphold the result of that referendum. They voted to trigger Article 50. If we weasel out now, we'll be rumbled.
Tonight, the second day of debate on the deal ended with the Foreign Secretary acknowledging
the dilemmas in everyone's mind and the conflicts of loyalty to party, government, country, and particularly to voters who voted to leave the EU. And we should not pretend that this is an easy decision for anyone.
2 long days of debate done, and the government's hold on its deal, on its party, and even on its very ability to govern is looking more troubled than ever. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
All right, so if the options seem to be disappearing at a rate of knots, what is left? Well, there is, as I was suggesting, one that might just work. It's still Brexit, technically at least. The Labour Party would probably support it. So would at least some Tories. So might the DUP. Case closed then, except it has an awful lot of drawbacks too, not least that it would fail to end freedom of movement. I am talking, of course, of the so-called Norway option. What is it? Rachel Younger explains.
Over the past few years, we've embraced Nordic drama and Scandi chic. So has the time come to follow the Norway model politically too? It is the so-called Plan B option. And with Theresa May's Brexit deal teetering on a cliff edge in Parliament, the suggestion is that the Norway model could be something MPs from all sides could back. So what is it? Well, Norway's deal is this. It is outside the EU, but it has access to its markets. If the UK took the same route, it would be considered the softest of Brexits. Why? Because next March we would enter the European Economic Area, the common market of 31 member states. That's all of the EU countries, plus Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein. But why might we need another plan?
The difficulty is that MPs can't just vote against something. They actually have to regroup and decide what it is they want to vote for, because if we're not going to have no deal, it's got to be something else, and they've got to make a positive choice to support something, not just reject the thing they don't want.
So if we did end up with a Norway model, what would be in it for us? The government's own Brexit impact study found the Norway option would be the least damaging for the UK economy. Staying inside the single market would mean our goods, services and labour would all flow freely. And that should avoid the need for a hard Irish border. Remember just how much trouble the so-called backstop has caused. Sound too good to be true? Well, there would be some big compromises. Yes, it would be cheaper, but we'd still end up paying the EU £4 billion a year. The UK would have to accept EU laws. And then there's the issue that was right at the heart of the referendum: immigration. EU citizens would still be able to move freely across our borders, and we'd have no say on any of it.
The UK at the moment is a decision maker in the EU. You can argue about how much influence we've had during our EU membership, but Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein are outside that decision-making room. They are sometimes get consulted. They do get consulted as decision shapers, but they're not decision makers.
So is it even a realistic option? It is the preferred alternative of Parliament's Brexit Select Committee. As one member put it, it's time to ditch the dogma and get realistic. But the Prime Minister insists it's not Brexit being against the will of the people. And having herself experienced the reality of all this, the Norwegian Prime Minister can't understand it, asking, why should you leave the EU if you're accepting a Norway deal? They're questions Parliament has made it clear it wants to address, leaving our MPs voting not just on the Withdrawal Act from the EU, but demanding a say after that on whether we should try the Norwegian model instead.
Rachel Younger there, and Romilly is here. Do you know, I start every day thinking things are going to get clearer today, and I end up worrying if they're not going to get crazier tomorrow. So let's just start with the DUP we talked about. Are they really going to pull the plug on the government, do you think, if she gets this deal through?
Well, it does seem extraordinary because it goes against their interests in so many ways. Would they really want to hasten a Jeremy Corbyn-led government? And yet that is the position that their absolute hatred of this deal is leading them to. In a way, though, it is a moot point because, as you can hear in Nigel Dodds's interview with Robert Peston later, what he is saying categorically is there is almost nothing the Prime Minister can do to persuade them to back this deal. And Brexiters like Ian Duncan Smith, like Boris Johnson, as you heard in my report there, and other members of the European Research Group are saying the same. They're saying that their refusal to back this deal could even strengthen the Prime Minister because it sends her back to Brussels armed, and in a way the EU won't listen unless she takes that message with her.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, we should probably say that their objection to Jeremy Corbyn, of course, is his previous attitude to Irish republicanism. But let's just move on to the Norway option. Is it realistic, viable, sensible?
Well, it does have some powerful cross-party support on the Tory side, people like Nicky Morgan and Oliver Letwin. On the Labour side, Stephen Kinnock. It has certainly been discussed by Remain members of the Cabinet. People like Amber Rudd and the Chancellor are thought likely to support it if it comes to that. But the problem, as Rachel was setting out there, is it doesn't end free movement. And it doesn't solve the problem. There is a consensus against the Prime Minister's deal. What there isn't yet is a consensus for any other option.
I know. Let's see what tomorrow brings. But for now, Romilly, thank you very much indeed.
Is there anything the Prime Minister can do now to win round her Brexiteer MPs? After defeat, after defeat, after defeat yesterday, and the forced publication of the full legal advice today, minds are more entrenched than ever. But tonight we understand meetings between Theresa May's chief whip and leading members of the ERG will seek to ascertain what can be offered in return for their vote on her deal. The hardline Brexiteers are being told the deal itself cannot be changed. But can their support be bought in different ways, and what can persuade her other critics? Nick Watt is here. Tell us your news first tonight, Nick.
Well, in the last few hours, it has emerged that the Prime Minister has instructed the Civil Contingency Secretariat, they're the guys who look after national emergencies, to invite all Privy Councillors who are MPs, whatever party, to come to briefings on what is described as the immediate impact of a no deal. Now, one Privy Councillor said to me, this is the Prime Minister playing the no deal card. Brexiteers are not amused. They're describing this as an absurdity and saying that the Prime Minister is trying to spook the grandees.
So she believes in this no deal. She is now contemplating this could happen. What are the proponents, the ERG, saying?
Well, I mean, it's very, very clear that the Prime Minister is really worried about the dangers of no deal, because, of course, no deal means no transition. And the ERG are saying that this, as I was saying, this is an absurdity. But tonight, the Chief Whip has met the European Research Group, and he's going to meet them again tomorrow. And there is a talk of compromise in the air, trying to come up with a government amendment that will persuade Brexiteers to support the government position. And what they are talking about is giving Parliament some sort of role. Maybe Parliament could have a role in the backstop on Northern Ireland being started. But the key thing is, you cannot, talk to one source in Number 10, you cannot rewrite the withdrawal agreement with the EU. So it would be the UK making a unilateral proposal. So, you know, a really big day today. Isolated, losing friends, and with options closing off, Theresa May has days to save her Brexit deal and possibly her premiership. Today, her task became a little more complicated when the government finally published its Brexit legal advice. This raised questions about the Prime Minister's claim that Northern Ireland would remain fully integrated in the UK. In his advice, the Attorney General Geoffrey Cox suggested there would be barriers between Northern Ireland and Great Britain if the backstop is triggered. This is the mechanism to avoid a hard border in the event of a failure to negotiate a future trading relationship with the EU. The legal advice states, for regulatory purposes, Great Britain is essentially treated as a third country by Northern Ireland for goods passing from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. The stark nature of the advice by the Attorney General, who's been troubled by the Brexit compromises, is a far cry from statements by Theresa May.
The draft legal text the Commission have published would, if implemented, undermine the UK common market and threaten constitutional integrity of the UK by creating a customs and regulatory border down the Irish Sea. And no UK Prime Minister could ever agree to it.
Even the Prime Minister's supporters are dismayed by the apparent discrepancies. One former Cabinet Minister said to me, how on earth does Number 10 think it can get away with this stuff? Downing Street insists that Theresa May has never misled anyone. She has always said there would be no customs barriers within the UK, but has always spoken with great care when talking about regulatory differences. The DUP is furious.
People in Northern Ireland ought to be very, very worried this evening that if this deal ever went through, what would be the implications for their jobs and for the union which I mean, people have fought and died in Northern Ireland to preserve the union, and yet the Prime Minister tells us this is a good deal for us.
Labour thinks the government has been less than straightforward.
Let's think back to the Prime Minister coming to the lectern only some weeks ago at 10 Downing Street, saying to the EU, "You must not split my country." Well, that is precisely what the impact of this backstop would be. I think it's pretty clear that whatever her strategy was, it has comprehensively failed. Now, we've as Labour opposition been making that in broader terms over the past 18 months, with red lines turning pink, ideas about staging the talks that have simply been dismissed by the European Union. But here we have a very good example of a specific promise given by the Prime Minister in Downing Street, which she quite simply, for whatever reason, hasn't been able to deliver. And actually being able to obtain this legal advice is what's shown us that.
A former minister is surprised because he thought he was following government policy when he said there would be no barriers down the Irish Sea.
I confess I have used that line myself, and I may even have used it at the dispatch box during Northern Ireland questions. And I was certainly not aware of this advice during my time in the Northern Ireland office. I think where we are is a matter that this legal advice certainly says that Northern Ireland would be looking at us as a third country, and that is something that would be upsetting both for many people living in Northern Ireland, but also for members of the Conservative and Unionist Party to give us our full title.
A supporter of the Brexit deal said the legal advice showed the difficult decisions the Prime Minister is having to make.
And so much of it is ultimately a political judgment. Ultimately, it comes down to the judgment of MPs about what is the right thing to do to the country. You can't just say, well, the lawyer says it's okay. We need to decide.
Parliament is in the throes of a week-long debate that will decide Britain's relations with the EU for decades to come. The row over the legal advice shows how a fragile government can easily be thrown off balance.
That was Nick Wharton. Joining us now, the Conservative MP Vicky Ford, who yesterday in Parliament said she was backing the government's proposed deal. Nigel Dodds, the leader of the DUP at Westminster. And we're going to start with Andrew Bridgen, a member of the Eurosceptic European Research Group that's been meeting with the Chief Whip today. I just want to pick up, Andrew, on where Nick left off. Have they offered you anything tonight?
No, they haven't. And there is nothing now at this stage which the Prime Minister or the government can say or do which will prevent me from voting against the withdrawal agreement. And the reason for that is there's nothing within the gift of either the Prime Minister or the government to do which can alter the withdrawal agreement.
So,
it has supremacy over the UK law, so there's nothing we can pass in Parliament that's going to affect it.
Was the Chief Whip meeting with your members this evening?
He did. He met with us and answered numerous questions.
And what did he try and offer as a result of your refusal to budge on that issue then?
Well, he offered consultation with the representatives of the ERG to see how he could garner support, but he's not in a position to offer any adjustments to the withdrawal agreement. And the sad thing is that for the last 4 months since the Chequers proposals came forward, I and many members of the ERG and other senior members of the Conservative Party have raised our concerns that this was not a basis that we could move forward and support our withdrawal.
Is he wasting his breath then? I mean, talking to you any more about this particular deal? Yes.
I think he is, because, as I say, it's not within his gift, the government's or the Prime Minister's gift, to alter the agreement, which we're going to vote on Tuesday.
I wonder whether you feel that the ERG have now squandered their power, your power. Parliament is now in charge, and your moment's peaked and passed.
I think the problem with our Parliament is we've probably only got about 150, 160 MPs in our Parliament who actually campaigned and voted to leave the European Union. I think we're in a position now where you're either supporting the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, or you're supporting Parliament. So you're either with Parliament against the people, or you're with the people against the Parliament. And my seat voted to leave, and I will back the people every time.
But with that in mind, then, your Trump deal was no deal to a certain extent. If that has now disappeared, because as you say...
It hasn't. The Grieve Amendment makes no difference. It has no legal precedence, and it has no more power than a vote at the Oxford Union.
Are you sure that your constituents and constituents of other ERG members are not now saying, take this deal, because if you don't, you're going to let Brexit slip out of your hands? That's what their worry is now.
I don't think that's the case. I think we can negotiate a far better deal than this. It'd be difficult to get a worse deal, and we've got to stick with it.
So the Chief Whip, Vicky, is wasting his breath trying to convince the ERG?
I think that we need to continue working on this basis, because when I look at the options on the table,
I either look at the risks, increasing risk of a no-deal Brexit and all the uncertainty that creates for jobs and livelihoods. No, I'm sorry, I really do think that that is a very high-risk scenario and a likely scenario if we don't have a negotiated deal. Or you look at the group in Parliament who want to push it towards a second referendum and no Brexit at all. And actually the Grieve Amendment makes that also more likely, especially when coupled with the ECJ work that's going on and suggesting that Article 50 could be revoked. So I really think you're in a situation where some people want a second referendum. I think that's incredibly high risk and divisive. Or otherwise you end up risking a no-deal Brexit, which I think is very likely.
Except you've heard this analogy that the Prime Minister is basically driving her car into a brick wall and nobody's stopping her and nothing's changing and Brussels isn't changing and the ERG isn't changing and you're carrying on supporting her, presumably in the face of legal advice, which I'm guessing made you shudder a bit today.
Well, you know, I don't want to end up in the Northern Irish backstop, and I understand that that's a legal risk, and I question the Attorney-General about it, but it's a legal risk, and in my view, it's not a practical risk, because it's not in the EU's interests to hold the UK in that backstop, and it would be legally challengeable under EU law, because the EU's not allowed to use that as a permanent solution.
Who are you talking to? That's the question. Who are you actually trying to persuade now? Because you see where the Remainers are and you see where Labour's sitting and you see where the ERG is, and we'll get to the DUP
but
in a moment.
I also
Who is she talking to now?
I also think I need to use my best judgment to vote for what I think is in the best interest of the people that I represent, OK? I don't think, and when I listen to Labour, they don't care what's in the deal. They just want to force a second general election, which they've said very clearly now. I want to find a way through that respects the referendum. We must respect the referendum, but that also protects jobs and livelihoods, because during the referendum, people were told there would be a trade deal, and I think we need to deliver that.
Nigel Dodds, you've said that you will support Theresa May if there's a vote of no confidence. Is that still how you feel today?
Well, what we have said is that we are focused on what happens at this meaningful vote. We believe, for the reasons that you've referred to in the legal advice that's been published today, which I think is stark and, in my view, devastating for the Prime Minister and the deal that she's proposing, suggesting that Northern Ireland will be in a different customs arrangement, in the sense that we are in the customs union of the EU, Britain is not, that there will be customs declarations required from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, and that this can go on, despite talk about not being permanent, indefinitely, and only the EU can allow us out of it.
You hate her deal. You find the legal advice devastating. You're not going to support that. So my question to you is, can you still support her if there is a vote of no confidence?
What we have said is, clearly, if this meaningful vote ends in taking down the deal that the Prime Minister has proposed, and there's a large consensus now across the House, every party's against it, and even within the Conservative Party, a great division. So it's likely to be voted down. In that sense, it wouldn't be logical, in my view, to turn around the next day and say, haven't achieved what we wish to achieve, get the government to think again and go down a different direction, then to bring the government down. That wouldn't be logical.
Or you could say it's slightly illogical to say, I hate all her work, but we want to keep her in place. I mean, what's
No. Our deal is with the Conservative Party. Our deal was on the basis of shared priorities for Brexit. Now, Theresa May has proposed a deal which breaches that. We haven't breached the confidence supply agreement. Our shared priority was leaving the United Kingdom as one country. No customs barriers, no regulatory barriers. The Prime Minister said that in terms on the 20th of February, no British Prime Minister could accept customs differences or regulatory differences. And the reality is that there's a lot of people who now, you know, you said about what can be done now. There's a lot of lack of trust now, and what we need to get back to is what's in the legal text, what will endure, what matters here is what's put down in legal text. So you can have all sorts of assurances from people saying, oh, it might never happen. The fact is that it's likely to happen if we end the transition period with no trade deal.
I also said what can be offered and who could be bought, and candidly, the DUP has shown it can be bought. £1 billion change hands for your support. At what point does your principle give way to pragmatism?
Well, let's just examine what you've just said there. We negotiated a deal for Northern Ireland, which is to the benefit of unionists, nationalists, Protestants, Catholics and people who have no religion whatsoever, to invest in roads, health, education,
Let's call it investment
mental
then.
health.
But
yes.
if more
So
investment was offered to the DUP, would you be prepared to take it at this point?
No, that's not. This is not a question of going back to what can be offered to us or to Northern Ireland in terms of money or anything else. The fact of the matter is that this deal, in terms of the backstop arrangements, which would be indefinite if we enter into it, which would be at the behest of the EU as to whether we get out and on what terms we get out, will over time create massive divergences over time between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And our biggest market by far is the UK market. Now, it would be madness economically, never mind the constitutional implications, to allow that to come about. So, you know, what would be the value of saying, well, let's have a bit of extra investment now, when the long-term economic and constitutional consequences would be so bad for Northern Ireland?
Which brings us full circle, that if the Prime Minister is telling us the withdrawal agreement cannot be changed and you're saying we cannot back this, what is left then? A government of national unity has been mooted this evening. Is that something that you would support, or are you nearing a snap election point?
Well, look, I don't think a general election at this stage is in the interests of the country. I don't think a second referendum is either. I think Parliament has been given its instructions by the people of the United Kingdom as a whole to get on with Brexit. Now, we don't want a no-deal Brexit. I don't think anybody wants that. But there's a lot of time now being wasted, and has been wasted in recent months by the Prime Minister, by going down a path that she must have known weeks ago could not command a majority in Parliament. And I think that's the tragedy of the situation we find ourselves in, and it could have been avoided.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.